The IQ myth that fooled millions. Imagine sitting alone in a quiet classroom. A teacher places a sheet of paper on your desk and says only one sentence. This test will measure how intelligent you are. You have no idea that the number written beside your name a few minutes later could follow you for the rest of your life. It could influence how teachers see you, how employers judge you, even how you see yourself. For more than 100 years, millions of people believed that a single number called IQ could measure human intelligence. Schools used it, governments trusted it, armies relied on it, psychologists defended it, parents worried about it. Some people proudly built their identity around a high IQ. Others quietly accepted that a low score meant they were simply less intelligent. It became one of the most powerful numbers in modern history. But there is one problem. That is not what the IQ test was originally created to do. Somewhere along the way, the world changed its meaning. A tool designed to help children slowly became a label that judged them. A simple educational assessment became something much bigger. And for decades, millions of people believed a story that was never quite true. So, how did one psychological test become one of the biggest myths of the modern world? And what does an IQ score actually measure? The answer is far more surprising than most people realize. The story begins in France. The year was 1904. At the time, the French government faced a growing problem. For the first time, education was becoming compulsory for children across the country. Classrooms were filling up, but teachers quickly noticed something important. Not every child learned at the same pace. Some children understood lessons almost immediately. Others struggled, even after repeated explanations. The government needed a way to identify which children required extra educational support. Not to separate them, not to label them, but to help them before they fell behind. So they turned to a psychologist named Alfred Binet. Binet was given a simple mission: create a practical method to identify children who needed additional help in school. Nothing more. Working with his colleague, Theodore Simon, he developed a series of short mental tasks. Children solved puzzles, remembered numbers, recognized patterns, answered simple questions. The goal was never to discover who was smart or stupid. It was to estimate whether a child's thinking skills matched what was expected for their age. That was the birth of the first modern intelligence test. But here is the part almost nobody talks about. Binet repeatedly warned that his test should never be treated as a measure of a person's fixed intelligence. He believed intelligence could grow. He believed children could improve through education, practice, and opportunity. In fact, he openly argued that reducing a human mind to a single number would be a serious mistake. Yet history had very different plans. Within just a few years, Binet's careful educational tool left France. And once it crossed the Atlantic, everything changed. When the IQ test arrived in the United States, it entered a country that was changing faster than almost anywhere else in the world. Factories were growing, cities were expanding, millions of immigrants were arriving from Europe every year. Schools were overcrowded. The government wanted faster ways to classify people, and many psychologists believed they had found the perfect tool. They adapted Binet's educational test into something very different. Instead of asking, which children need extra help, the new question became, how intelligent is this person? It sounds like a small change, but it completely transformed the meaning of the test. Then came the event that made IQ famous across America, World War I. In 1917, the U.S. Army faced an enormous challenge. Millions of new recruits had to be assigned to the right jobs as quickly as possible. Psychologists introduced large-scale intelligence tests to help sort soldiers. For the first time in history, hundreds of thousands of people were tested using similar mental exams. The idea spread rapidly. If the military trusted IQ tests, surely schools should too, then universities, then employers. Before long, a single score was being used to make important decisions about people's futures. The IQ test was no longer just an educational tool. It had become a symbol of intelligence itself. But there was one enormous problem. Many of those early tests measured far more than reasoning. They also depended on language, education, culture, and life experience. A child who had grown up with better schools, more books, and greater opportunities often performed better. Not necessarily because they were born more intelligent, but because they had been given different chances to learn. Yet the numbers looked scientific. People trusted them, and once a number feels objective, very few people stop to question what it is actually measuring. That simple misunderstanding would shape psychology, education, and public opinion for decades. But the biggest surprise was still waiting, because modern science would eventually discover that intelligence is far more complicated than anyone had imagined. For decades, the world treated IQ as if it were the final answer, a single number, one score, one measurement that could supposedly reveal the true power of the human mind. But science rarely stays still. As researchers continued studying intelligence, they began noticing something strange. Some people with exceptionally high IQ scores struggled in everyday life. Others with average scores built successful companies, made groundbreaking discoveries, or became extraordinary leaders. Something didn't add up. If IQ measured intelligence so perfectly, why didn't it predict success perfectly? Then psychologists started asking a different question. What if intelligence isn't just one ability? What if it is made of many different skills working together? Some people solve mathematical problems with incredible speed. Others understand emotions better than anyone around them. Some can visualize complex objects in their minds. Others create music that changes generations. Some inspire millions with nothing more than words. Are all of these people intelligent? Most of us would say yes, but many of those abilities are only partly reflected in a traditional IQ test. Modern neuroscience has made the picture even more complicated. The human brain is not a single machine running one program. It is a network of specialized systems working together. Memory, attention, language, pattern recognition, creativity, decision-making, social understanding. Each relies on different parts of the brain, and each develops differently from person to person. This doesn't mean IQ tests are useless. Far from it. They can be valuable tools for measuring certain kinds of reasoning and problem solving. They remain useful in education, psychology, and scientific research, but they were never designed to capture the full complexity of human intelligence. The mistake wasn't the test itself. The mistake was believing the test measured everything, and that misunderstanding quietly changed the way millions of people judge themselves and each other. The most dangerous part of the IQ story was never the number itself. It was the meaning we attached to it. For decades, people looked at an IQ score and saw something permanent. A high score became proof of brilliance. A low score became a quiet sentence that some people carried for the rest of their lives. Children began believing they were either smart or not smart. Teachers sometimes lowered their expectations. Parents worried that a single result defined their child's future, and many adults spent years measuring their own worth against a number that was never meant to define them. But human intelligence doesn't stop growing because of a test. Every time you learn a new language, master a new skill, solve a problem you've never faced before, or adapt to a completely new situation, your brain changes. It builds new connections. It rewires itself. Modern neuroscience calls this neuroplasticity, the brain's remarkable ability to adapt and learn throughout life. In other words, your potential is not frozen on the day you take an IQ test. It continues to evolve. That doesn't mean IQ is meaningless. It can measure certain cognitive abilities, and it remains useful in many educational and clinical settings. But it was never designed to measure your creativity, your kindness, your determination, your wisdom, your courage, or your ability to overcome obstacles that no test could ever predict. Perhaps the biggest myth wasn't that IQ tests existed. The biggest myth was believing they could tell the entire story of a human being, because no single number can capture a lifetime of curiosity. No score can measure resilience, and no exam can predict every future. The next time someone tells you that intelligence can be reduced to one number, remember where that idea began, and remember how easily the world misunderstood it. Maybe intelligence was never about proving how smart you are. Maybe it has always been about how willing you are to keep learning. Because the greatest minds in history didn't know everything. They simply never stopped asking questions. This is Why Explained, where science meets curiosity and every question has a story. If you enjoyed this documentary, subscribe to Why Explained, because the world is full of ideas that seem simple until you discover the truth behind them.